My family loves the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We've seen every MCU movie that's been made, some several times. In fact, my girls are such Spider Man fans, I once named our Wi Fi Tom Holland just for them. I think what draws us to the superhero genre is that deep down we long to be one. Well, what about it? Are you a superhero? Do you want to be a hero? You can be. Let's talk about it. I'm Bill Wynn. Welcome to the Good Dirt.
The Good Dirt is brought to you in part by Grace Communion Hanover. You belong to Jesus, so believe in Jesus and become like Jesus.
Have you ever heard of or been to a chapel? Maybe you were married in a quaint little wedding chapel. Maybe you were married in a drive-through chapel in, let's say, Las Vegas. Have you ever been to a chapel in a hospital? Or maybe you went to summer camp and there was a chapel there. And the women and the men who led the activities in the chapel are called what? That's right, chaplains. I've served as a chaplain at summer camps for many years with teens and preteens. I was chaplain for the Sons of the American Revolution at one point. I currently serve in the Volunteer Chaplains Corps for the Hanover County, Virginia Sheriff's Department. Chaplains perform a variety of duties, depending on the circumstances, and offer services based on their area of expertise and giftedness. For instance, in the Hanover County Sheriff's Chaplains Corps, we pray for the sheriff and his staff. We work together with the other churches in the community to promote safety, open communication, and trust between members of our communities, businesses, and first responders. When there is a tragedy in our county, at the family member's request, a chaplain will be dispatched to come alongside that family and offer emotional and spiritual support, as well as to assist with needs they may have in the days and weeks following the tragedy. I remember a chaplain we had one time at a summer camp that I worked at in the Boundary Waters of Minnesota when I was in college. I'd gone there for the whole summer to work. The chaplain's name was Pastor Jeff. He was and is an extraordinarily gifted man. Once in a chapel message, he told us the story of David and Goliath. And the title of the message, I'll never forget it, was 5 Rocks and a Little Bit of Faith. He described the events of the story with such enthusiasm and detail that we felt as though we were right there with the little shepherd boy as he slew the great giant. As he described this biblical superhero, David, we were captivated. And then he told us that all we needed to be a hero for God was to have 5 rocks and a little bit of faith. He promised us that the little bit of faith necessary to gather 5 smooth stones and trust God would always be enough when we got into any kind of trouble. Little did I know that very week his promise would be put to the test. That summer at camp, during the final 3-week session, I was on activity staff and was in charge of sailing. We had 12 14-foot sailboats that would each hold about 6 campers and 1 pilot. The boats had a mainsail and a jib sail, so they were perfect for teaching campers basic sailing skills. Those little boats were fun, and in the right wind, they were fast. Well, it was only about 2 miles across the lake to the town of Orr, Minnesota. So if the wind was right and we could spare the time, my friend Zane and I would sail across to town and stock up on chips, sodas, and candy. You know, the basics for a healthy college student diet. Well, a few days after Pastor Jeff's message about the 5 rocks and a little bit of faith, I organized a sailboat race for the sailing staff, or any other staff who might want to compete. You see, we had a tradition at this camp. After breakfast, sometimes in the staff meeting, different staff members would stand up and issue a challenge. They might, if they worked at the skeet shooting range, they might challenge another staff member to a skeet shooting match. Or sometimes it was 2-on-2 basketball teams would challenge one another. And if you really wanted to get competitive, challenge the camp director to a game of horseshoes. Well, I stood up one day after breakfast and I challenged the entire sailing staff to a sailboat race. And I thought, it would be a lot of fun. Each two-person team would have a sternman and a jibsman. Now, a jibsman would sit at the bow of the boat and shift the ropes. They're called jib sheets. The ropes back and forth as the boat would tack or jibe. And tacking and jibing just means turning back and forth from upwind to sort of downwind. It's kind of how you have to travel forward when the wind is blowing in your direction. Well, I had a secret weapon. I had a high school staffer who was an excellent sailor. He was the best high school staffer we had in the sailing department, and I had already arranged ahead of time for him to be on my team before anyone else could pick him. Well, the afternoon we had chosen for the race was perfect. There was a steady wind blowing in our faces for the first leg of the race. We were going to race from the sailboat docks around an island in the middle of the lake and then back. And I knew it. I was sure we would win because I was confident in our ability to tack and jibe into the wind better than anyone else. And then I thought once we rounded the island, why, we'd have the wind at our backs and we could really pick up speed. I thought it was a great plan, and maybe it was. I don't know. We never got a chance to find out. When the race began, my sailing partner and I got out to a slight lead. Our plan was working. We began to execute this plan, and aggressively we began to tack and jibe back and forth to reach the far side of the island. But during one of our turns, my partner, Kirby, looked back over his shoulder in the direction the wind was coming from, and the expression on his face was that of almost terror. Immediately I looked and I could see what was coming. It was a giant wall of wind, hailstones, and rain, huge drops of rain, and it was closing in on us fast, and it seemed like from out of nowhere. When it hit us, it flipped our boat like a bathtub toy. Kirby and I both were catapulted from the boat into the now choppy water. Well, at the beginning of the race, Kirby and I had diligently put on our life jackets like we were supposed to, but it was really hot outside, so we hadn't buckled them. When he and I went into the water, we both slipped out of our life jackets. We watched helplessly as the wind blew them across the lake. With hailstones almost as big as golf balls pelting us in the head and face, we both instinctively swam under the now overturned boat to get away from the hail. There was a good amount of air, plenty of space, lots of air to breathe, but under that boat, but the sound of the hailstones hitting the hull of the boat was deafening. I've never heard anything like it. The only thing I could hear over the sound of the hail was my friend Kirby shouting over and over again, "5 rocks and a little bit of faith! 5 rocks and a little bit of faith!" He hadn't forgotten Pastor Jeff's message, and boy, did we need a superhero right about then. In just a few minutes, this violent squall was over. When the sound of the hailstones hitting the bottom of the boat ceased, he and I both ducked under the gunwales of the overturned sailboat and emerged on the other side only to find the rescue boat right there. In fact, I almost bumped my head on the hull of the rescue boat. Well, they hauled us onto the boat. They hugged us. They told us they were happy that we were safe. It turns out that all the boats in our regatta had capsized, but we were the only crew that had not been found. Apparently, the rescue boat was launched from camp as soon as everyone on shore saw what had happened. They'd approached our boat, and on the way, they just saw our life jackets blowing across the water. Oh, and I think they did find one boat paddle floating in the water. Well, they came alongside of our overturned sailboat, and they yelled for us, but we couldn't hear them, and they feared the worst. So they went on and picked up everyone else. When we were finally rescued, when the storm was finally all over, We both got a stern lecture from Mr. Blackwell about keeping our life jackets securely fastened. The members of the rescue team were superheroes that day, at least to Kirby and I they were. They had endured the choppy water and the headache-causing hailstones. They'd left to find us in the middle of all of that, enduring the terrible conditions that we had ducked under the boat to avoid. Well, where does that come from? Does the willingness for a person to risk danger, to endure violent weather, to rescue another, does that have its origin in us? I don't think it does. Even little kids with very little exposure to concepts like heroism or altruism long deep down to be superheroes. I remember when I was a little boy, my sister and my cousins and I would make up all sorts of make-believe play acting games, whether it was cops and robbers or whatever it may be. We'd play fire rescue, and we wanted to be the hero. Nobody ever really wanted to be the bad guy. Sometimes you got picked to be the bad guy, but every one of us always wanted to be the good guy. We always wanted to be the hero in the story, to make a difference, to save the world. When our firstborn daughter was, I guess, about 18 months old, she got her mother to put a baby blanket on her like a cape, and she would run all over the house shouting, "Super me!" It took a little digging through a lot of backup hard drives, and my wife and I, diligently working together, finally found a clip I'd like to show you now. Oh, and by the way, I did ask my daughter, who is now 21 years old, if we could show this. Please excuse the video quality. It was shot on a digital camera back in 2004, so it's a little grainy. But I want you to take a look at this little tiny superhero and ask yourself, where does that come from?
You know what that means? On my right are the comics from season 1. Performed last night.
Don't be jealous. I know it's just an opportunity for a dad to brag on his kids. She was a cute little thing, still is. Well, I want you to think about that. Where does that come from? Even in an 18-month-old little girl, that desire to be a superhero, where does that come from? It is my belief that a true superhero, the superhero of all superheroes, lives inside of all of us and is calling us to participate with him in his daily acts of heroism. I believe that person is Jesus, the indwelling Christ. The response to danger and the desire to take on the risk and endure the pain and peril indeed does not have its origin in us. That superhero, alive inside of you, Jesus Christ, lives in us by the power of the Holy Spirit. This doesn't happen when we become believers. Jesus is in every single one of us. And the Bible tells us in Galatians 4:4 that the Holy Spirit is inside of us crying, "Abba, Father." Abba meaning daddy, Father meaning God, Daddy God, bearing witness to the father-son relationship. I want to tell you now about a man named Martin of Tours. Martin was born in Pannonia in the 4th century, which Pannonia is modern-day Hungary. Martin was born to pagan parents, and we say pagan parents, we don't mean it as a pejorative. It just means they weren't Christians. They weren't believers. They believed in the pantheon. They believed in all sorts of idols and false gods. So that was Martin's background. When he was about 10 years old, he began attending occasionally a Christian church with some of his friends. His parents weren't too happy about that. They sort of believed that if you didn't worship the right gods, bad things would happen to the whole community or even the whole country. So his attendance with this Christian religion, this Christian church, his attendance was discouraged, but he persisted. When he was 15 years old, Martin enlisted as a Roman soldier in the Roman army. And he served there for 3 years until something extraordinary happened. I want you to take a look at this icon as I describe the scene. One day in the city of Amiens, I think that's pronounced correctly, in the country we now know as France, then called Gaul, Martin was mounted on a horse, and he was entering through the city gate when he saw a naked beggar. It was cold weather, and his heart was burdened for the man, seemingly out of nowhere. But Martin had nothing to give him. Roman soldiers didn't carry money. They didn't have a lot of possessions most of the time because Roman soldiers were required to be able to move fast and light at a moment's notice. They only carried whatever it was the Roman army issued to them, much like soldiers in armies today. They carry their standard issued equipment and pretty much nothing else. Roman soldiers also wore a cape of sorts. It was part of the uniform. It looked regal. It commanded respect. It commanded attention. Well, this cape was known as a capelle or chapelle, depending on how you pronounce it. It attached at the shoulders. It hung all the way down to the bottom of their calf muscles, and then it folded and came back up and pinned at the shoulders again. It was part of their uniform, but it also served as a blanket. At night, when they lay on the ground, they could simply unpin their cape and wrap up and stay warm. Moved with compassion for the naked beggar, Martin cut his cape, his capelle, his chapelle, in half and gave it to the man to warm himself. That night, Jesus, the indwelling Christ, came to Martin in a dream, wearing only the portion of his cape that he had given the beggar. It was there in Martin's life that he left the Roman army and dedicated himself to the pursuit of the Christian faith and practice. He became a student of Hilary of Poitiers. Studying under Hilary, he eventually became Bishop of Tours in France, and he dedicated his life to the monastic movement. Did you know, based on Martin's vision, churches in Gaul, now called France, began to paint murals of Jesus as the beggar wearing Martin's chapelle. This is how houses of worship became known as chapels, and those who presided over the affairs of the church began to be called chaplains. Indeed, we all need help, and we're all called to be superheroes in the lives of others. I'm sure you can think of times in your life when you set out to help someone, and those events aren't always huge. It isn't always the case that we are summoned to a window of a burning building where someone is crying for help so that we can rush in and rescue them or save them. It isn't always the case that we are called upon to rush someone to the hospital who is having a medical emergency. Sometimes the acts of heroism to which Jesus calls us are as simple as making a grocery run for a sick neighbor, maybe cutting grass for someone you know who has, I don't know, a broken foot. How about just a kind word? How many times have you been in line somewhere? Maybe you were at the grocery store and you were trying to check out. And the cashier, maybe it's his first day. Maybe he's a 17-year-old high school student. He's just trying to make a little extra money to help pay for gas, maybe save up for his first car. Who knows why he's working there? And he's just learning how to run that cash register. And you know how technology is. Sometimes things just don't go right. And he's having a terrible time, and he's making all kinds of mistakes, and nothing wants to go right. And it's taking 10 times longer than it should, and you got somewhere to be. And he knows from experience what everybody's thinking. In his mind, they're all thinking what a incompetent person he is, and they're all wishing that he would just Get on with it. Hurry up. Do it right. Call somebody else over here that can get the job done if you can't do it. Who knows what's going on in his mind? How huge is it in that moment to offer a word of encouragement, to remain patient, and to realize that you really have all the time in the world. You have eternity. We all do. We all have eternity. When I was, I think I was probably 24 or maybe 25, I was living in Washington State and I was driving a company owned vehicle. I was going back to the office where I was due. They were expecting me so they could send me out to do something else somewhere else. And I passed a car that was sitting in a turn lane and there was fire dripping out from underneath the engine bay. So I just quickly pulled over and I thought, man, that can't be good. Looks like that car is going to catch on fire. And who knows, if you've seen enough television or movies, in your mind, you're thinking the thing could explode, which I don't know if it would have exploded, but it certainly isn't healthy to sit patiently in the driver's seat of a car that is on fire. So I found a place to pull over. I ran over and I tapped on the window and I told the man his car was on fire. He jumped out and we began to sort of try to figure out what to do. I ran across the street to a gas station to get a fire extinguisher, and as I picked it up to run out the door, the man calmly said, "It's out." So I threw it down on the ground. I yelled, I think, the word worthless, like this fire extinguisher is worthless. Like, who has a fire extinguisher that's empty and hanging it back on the wall? Anyway, so I ran across the street to another business and I asked for a fire extinguisher, and they had one that was full. And so he and I together were able to put out that fire. No one got burned, no one got hurt. It was a little dicey. When he raised the hood, it let a lot more air and oxygen in on the fire. And boy, that changed things in a hurry. When all of that air got on that fire, it really did flare up. But like I say, I had a big fire extinguisher and it was nice and full. So we were able to put the fire out. Where does that come from? I'm not a firefighter. I've never trained to be a firefighter. And I think at some point someone had shown me how to use a fire extinguisher, or really the instructions are on the side. It's not that hard. If you know how to read, you can sort of figure out what to do. And fortunately, there was enough chemical in that fire extinguisher to get the job done. And then I headed back over to work. And I was late, and they asked me why I was late. And I very vividly recall telling the story with as much enthusiasm and drama as possible so that I would not be in trouble for being late. That does not have its origin in me. Jesus, the indwelling Christ, even I couldn't have articulated that back then. I didn't know anything about Jesus, the indwelling Christ. But I didn't have to know it for it to be true. You see, things are true whether we know them to be true or not. Reality is what it is. T.F. Torrance, in responding to James Barr, reminded him that no syntax contains its own semantics. He said, realities come before words, and words are used to describe them, not the other way around. So we use our words as Hilary of Poitiers, the teacher, the master of Martin of Tours. He says, we strain the poor resources of our language to speak of things that are too great for words. In the introduction, I asked you if you wanted to be a hero. Maybe your answer is no. Maybe in the introduction at the beginning, you thought being a hero meant you had to quit your job and go train to be a firefighter or become an EMT. Maybe when you heard be a superhero, you thought don a cape and fight crime. No, what I mean is deep down, we all to some degree want to be heroes, because there is one who lives in us who is a hero and is calling us to join him in his daily acts of heroism. You're a hero to someone. If you're a parent, I promise, you're a hero to your children. If you're a teacher, are you not a hero to those young minds? Firefighters, sheriff's deputies, plumbers, electricians, you may laugh, HVAC techs. I remember a few years ago, our air conditioning quit during one of the hottest parts of the year. There was no breeze, there was no wind, and it was high humidity and high temperatures, and we couldn't even sleep. My daughters couldn't sleep, especially because their rooms were upstairs, and heat rises. So it was insufferable. And when the man came to fix our unit, he was like a hero to us. There are so many people in our lives that in certain moments sort of feel like heroes, don't they? So look around. There are people in your life at different times, day to day, wherever you go. You have an opportunity to put on your cape and be a hero in their life. If all you do is pick up a piece of litter off the ground, go do something. Jesus lives inside you and calls you by the Holy Spirit to join him on his mission to reveal himself in the world. There can be no greater act of heroism than to introduce someone to the Jesus who is living inside of them. If you want that, why don't you pray these words to Jesus after me? Just say, Jesus, I want to know if you really are in me. I want to know what you know about your Father. And I want to believe what you believe about me. And then I want to follow you in your mission to reveal yourself in your relationship to your Father, to everyone, everywhere. If you'd like to support this program and the preaching of the undiluted gospel at Grace Communion Hanover, you can do so by visiting our website, gchanover.org, where you will find a link. Or you can text a gift to 804-409-0445. Until I see you again, I'm Bill Wynn, saying you belong to the Father, Son, and Spirit. You always have. You always will. The Father loves you, and he likes you. You are his beloved child.